Chapter 1. She told the police, "That man is not my husband." 2 days later, she was found dead. Now, the detective had two questions. Was this man an imposter? And was he a killer? The file was thin, resting on the scarred mahogany of his desk. Detective Inspector Vale regarded it with a heavy stillness, his office shrouded in the damp gray twilight of a London October. Rain, insistent and methodical, tapped against the tall window, a rhythm that seemed to measure the city's exhaustion. It was 1946. The war was over, but the ghosts remained, walking the streets in worn-out uniforms and hollow eyes. Vale was a man suited to this atmosphere. He was not old, but he was weary, carrying the cumulative weight of other people's secrets. He preferred the quiet of his office, the smell of old paper, weak tea, and the lingering scent of his pipe tobacco. He opened the file. The first page was a report from the front desk, logged by Sergeant Mulligan 3 days prior. Subject: Mrs. Eleanor Croft. Address: 4B Wellington Court, Kensington. Complaint: domestic concern, delusion. Vale read Mulligan's tidy, dismissive script. Mrs. Croft had arrived without an appointment. Her coat clutched tight. Her eyes, as Mulligan noted, wild. She had claimed the man who returned from the war, the man welcomed home as her husband, Captain Thomas Croft, was a stranger. "He looks like him," she had insisted, her voice a tremor in the bustling station house. "He has his face, his voice, but it is not him, the way he watches me, the way he waits." Mulligan, a practical man who had seen too much war nerves, had done his duty. He had asked the standard questions. Was the man violent? Had he threatened her? No. Eleanor Croft had admitted. He is quiet, terribly quiet. He is kind, but it is the kindness of a spider. He doesn't remember our cat mittens. He said he didn't recall the scar on my right knee. He holds his teacup with his left hand now. Thomas was always right-handed. Mulligan had checked. Captain Croft's army file noted he was ambidextrous, a useful skill in his line of work. He had been a commando, operating behind enemy lines for months, captured, presumed dead, and then liberated. The army psychiatrist had warned of significant personality shifts, of trauma, of memory gaps. Mulligan had gently suggested Mrs. Croft speak to a doctor he had called the flat. Captain Croft himself had answered, his voice calm, measured, and full of concern for his poor, distressed wife. He had come to the station to collect her, a handsome man in a well-cut suit, his face etched with a sadness that seemed entirely appropriate. He had thanked the sergeant, placed a protective arm around his wife's shoulders, and led her away. Mulligan had closed the file. A domestic tragedy, perhaps, but not a police matter until this morning. Vale turned the page. The second report was from a shivering young constable dispatched at 700 a.m. The milkman, finding the bottles from the previous day untouched, had peered through the letterbox of 4B Wellington Court and seen a shape at the bottom of the grand communal staircase. Eleanor Croft, neck broken, her body lay in a tangle of limbs, her silk dressing gown pulled around her. The estimated time of death was sometime after midnight. Vale closed his eyes for a moment, letting the rhythmic tapping of the rain fill the silence. A fall, a tragic accidental fall down a flight of polished stairs by a woman already noted as delusional and wild. It was tidy, it was convenient, and Vale did not believe in convenience. He rose slowly, his chair scraping softly against the wooden floor. He pulled on his heavy trench coat, the wool smelling faintly of the damp city air. He placed his pipe in his pocket, untapped, and settled his hat on his head. "Mullen," he said, his voice quiet, directed at the outer office. The sergeant appeared at the door, his face ruddy. "Sir, Wellington Court, I'm going myself. Have someone find Captain Croft. He's reportedly staying with friends. Find out which friends. I want to know where he was last night. And Mulligan. So I want Captain Croft's full army file, not the summary, the entire record. Medicals, psych evals, mission debriefs, everything. I want to know if he was ever reported as left-handed. Right, sir? You think she was? I think, Vale said, pulling on his gloves, that a woman was terrified enough to come to us, and 2 days later, she is dead. That is where my thinking begins. Wellington Court was in a part of Kensington that had survived the Blitz largely unscathed. A monolith of expensive cream-colored stone. The rain had subsided to a miserable drizzle, blurring the edges of the ornate iron gates. A young constable, his face pale, stood guard at the main door. Inspector Vale. Vale introduced himself, showing his badge. She's been taken, sir? The ambulance left an hour ago. The medical examiner is on his way. I'm not here for the body, Constable. I'm here for the stairs. He stepped inside. The lobby was cold, tiled in black and white marble that echoed his footsteps. The grand staircase curved upwards into the shadows of the upper floors. It was wide, carpeted with a heavy crimson runner, held in place by polished brass rods. Vale began at the bottom, where she had been found. There was no chalk outline yet, just a faint dark smear on the marble that the constable pretended not to see. Vale looked up. 2 full flights. He began to walk slowly, testing each step. The wood was old, solid. The runner was securely fastened. He ran his gloved hand along the polished banister. Nothing. No loose screws, no frayed edges, no patch of conveniently spilled liquid. He reached the landing for the 4th floor. The door to 4B was closed, a wax seal already affixed by the attending officer. He stood at the top of the staircase. Looking down the long, elegant drop, he imagined the fall, the silence of midnight, a trip, a stumble, a sudden, desperate cry swallowed by the heavy carpets, or perhaps no cry at all, perhaps just a hand. A firm, quiet, patient hand in the center of her back. He turned his attention to the landing. It was here she would have been just outside her own door. Why was she out here in her dressing gown? Had she been leaving? Had she been trying to flee? He knelt his knees, protesting. He examined the carpet fibers near the door. He was not a forensics expert, but he was a man of detail. He saw nothing. No thread from a man's suit, no scuff mark, no overturned plant. He stood, his gaze drifting from the door of 4B to the door opposite 4 Amperes. A sliver of light was visible beneath it, and he could hear the faint, muffled sound of a wireless broadcast. A neighbor, a witness. He walked to the door of 4B. The constable had the key procured from the building superintendent. Vale broke the seal and let himself in. The flat was silent, and as he had suspected, immaculate. It did not feel like a place of struggle or panic or even grief. It felt sterile. The cushions on the sofa were perfectly plumped. The magazines on the coffee table were fanned in a precise geometric arrangement. In the kitchen, the cups were dry. In the rack, the counters wiped clean. This was the flat of Captain Thomas Croft, the grieving husband, who upon finding his wife had apparently been composed enough to straighten the furniture before calling the police. Or the flat of a man who was expecting visitors. Vale moved into the study. It was a man's room. Dark wood, leather-bound books, a heavy desk. On the wall, framed commendations. On the desk, a single silver-framed photograph. It was a wedding photo. Thomas and Alina, she radiant and joyful, clinging to the arm of a smiling man in a captain's uniform. It was an image from before the war, before the man who returned. Vale picked up the frame, the silver cold to his touch. He studied the face of the man in the photograph. The man Eleanor Croft had sworn was her husband. He had a strong jaw, dark hair, and smiling eyes. Then Vale saw it. A small, thin, white scar, barely visible, disappearing into the hairline just above his left eyebrow. A dueling scar from university, perhaps a childhood accident. A detail. He stood there for a long time. The only sound, the muffled hum of the city outside, and the quiet ticking of a carriage clock on the mantelpiece. He remembered the file on his desk. The summary report, the physical description of the man who had returned from France. The man who had collected his wife from the station. Height 6 foot, hair dark brown, eyes hazel, build athletic. He mentally scanned the list again. He was almost certain, but he would check when he returned. He was almost certain that the description, detailed as it was, had made no mention of a scar. It was perhaps nothing, an oversight, an old scar that had faded with time or been obscured by the trauma of war. But as the carriage clock ticked, marking another second in the silent, sterile flat, Detective Vale felt the cold, methodical grip of certainty begin to form. The wife had said the man was not her husband. The police had said she was delusional. Vale placed the photograph back on the desk precisely as he had found it. He looked at the smiling face of the man who was or was not Thomas Croft. He had two questions. Now he felt he had the beginning of an answer. His next stop was not the station. It was to find the man with the missing scar. Chapter 2. The journey back to Scotland Yard was a descent into the city's gray, weary heart. Vale sat in the back of a black Austin, the windscreen wipers sweeping away the interminable drizzle, their rhythmic thwack squeegee, a counterpoint to the city's muted hum. London smelled of wet pavement, cold smoke, and a lingering metallic memory of war. The streets were not empty, but the energy was subdued. People moved with purpose, their heads down, their collars turned up, conserving a warmth that the watery afternoon sun could not provide. He preferred this. The artificial, sterile silence of Eleanor Croft's flat had been unsettling. This familiar, damp melancholy was the world he understood. He bypassed his own office and went straight to the records room, a vast, chilly chamber that smelled of agging paper and floor wax. Sergeant Mulligan, anticipating his request, had already pulled the two items Vale needed. The first was the initial complaint report. Vale's gloved finger traced the typed lines of the physical description taken by Mulligan himself when the man claiming to be Thomas Croft had collected his wife. Height 6 foot, hair dark brown, eyes hazel, build athletic, no distinguishing marks. Vale stared at that last phrase, no distinguishing marks. Mulligan was a thorough officer. He would not have missed a scar so close to the eye. The second item was a heavy manila folder, bound in string, stamped with the red ink of the War Office. Croft Thomas, Captain Special Operations Executive Vale, took the files and retreated to the quiet of his office. The rain was heavier now, drumming a steady, somnolent tattoo against the glass. He switched on his green-shaded desk lamp, casting a small, warm pool of light on the mahogany. He sat, not opening the thick army file just yet. He let the quiet settle, arranging the facts of the case in his mind as a librarian might arrange books. A dead woman who claimed her husband was an imposter. A husband who, according to a police report, lacked a key physical trait, a flat so clean it felt uninhabited. A death so convenient it screamed foul play. Mulligan appeared at his door, a shadow in the dim hallway. He held a slip of paper. "Found him, sir." Vale looked up, the single light glinting off his spectacles. "He's not at a friend's," Mulligan said, a note of slight surprise in his voice. "He's at the Savoy, checked in 2 nights ago, the night before Mrs. Croft was found." The Savoy, not a modest boarding house, not a sympathetic friend's spare room. The Savoy was a fortress of plush carpets, string quartets, and discreet service, a place for celebration or for hiding in plain sight. "He's there now, sir, in his room. Manager says he's taken all his meals there. Hasn't been seen since yesterday evening." "He's grieving," Vale said, the words flat, holding no conviction. "Quite, sir." "Thank you, Mulligan. Get me a car and see if the army file mentions a skin graft. Anything, face, shoulder, anywhere." Sir Mulligan vanished. Vale picked up his hat. He had hoped to read the file first to arm himself, but the man was there waiting, a spider in a gilded web. It was better to see him now, while the news of his wife's death was still raw, before he had time to perfect his performance. The lobby of the Savoy was another world. It was warm, dry, and lit by the soft golden glow of chandeliers. A low murmur of conversation, and the distant clink of silver on china replaced the sound of the rain. It was an island of pre-war luxury, untouched by the gray austerity outside. Vale in his damp trench coat felt like a specter, a thing of stone and rain trespassing in a world of velvet. He did not announce himself at the desk. He took the lift, a polished brass cage, to the 3rd floor, rooms 312. He stood outside the door for a full minute listening. There was no sound, no wireless, no packing, no muttered telephone conversation, just silence. He knocked, his knuckles striking the heavy wood 3 times, solid, firm. There was a pause, then the sound of a well-oiled lock sliding back. The door opened. The man standing there was exactly as the file described. 6 foot, handsome, with weary, intelligent hazel eyes. He was dressed in a dark blue silk dressing gown, his dark hair slightly damp, as if from a recent bath. He looked every inch the part of a tragic hero returned from war, and the skin above his left eyebrow was perfectly smooth. Yes. The man's voice was cultured quiet. Detective Inspector Vale, Scotland Yard. Vale held his badge aloft. May I come in? The man's eyes flickered to the badge, then back to Vale's face. There was no alarm, no suspicion, only a polite, weary curiosity. Of course, Inspector. Is this about Elena? It is. The man stepped back, gesturing Vale inside. Please, I've been worried. She wasn't at the flat when I telephoned this morning. The suite was large, overlooking the Thames. The lights were low. A half-eaten plate of toast and marmalade sat on a silver tray. A copy of the Times was folded on the arm of a chair. Please sit. The man gestured to a plush armchair before sitting on the edge of the bed himself, clutching the lapels of his dressing gown. Has she done something? Vale remained standing, his hat in his hand. He let the silence stretch, observing the room. It was tidy, but lived in. A man's suitcase lay open on a luggage rack, revealing neatly folded shirts and military-issue trousers beneath a civilian suit. It was the room of a traveler, not a resident. Mr. Croft, Vale began, his voice deliberately soft, matching the room's hushed tone. I'm afraid I have terrible news. Your wife was found this morning at your apartment building. She had a fall down the main staircase. He watched the man's face. It was a masterclass in controlled grief. The eyes widened just slightly. The color drained from his cheeks. His hand, the right hand, rose to cover his mouth, as if to stifle a cry that never came. A fall, he whispered. Oh God. Is she? She's dead, Mr. Croft. I'm very sorry. The man who called himself Thomas Croft slumped. He didn't sob, he just deflated. His shoulders rounded and he bowed his head, his free hand gripping the bedspread, knuckles turning white. I knew it, he breathed, his voice thick. I knew she wasn't well. Her nerves, the war, she barely knew who I was. She was so frightened. He looked up at Vale, his eyes shining with unshed tears. She told me she was afraid of the dark, afraid of heights. She said the flat felt like a trap. I told her we could move. I said we could go to the country. He was painting a picture, the correct picture. The one Mulligan had accepted, the one any reasonable person would believe. A tragically unstable woman, a grieving, patient husband. When did you last see your wife, Mr. Croft? Vale asked, his tone gentle, sympathetic. The day I collected her from the police station. She was so agitated, she didn't want to be in the flat with me. She said I wasn't myself. I thought he choked back a small sound. I thought if I gave her space, she might calm down. A friend from the regiment offered me his flat, but it's being painted. So, I came here, I thought, a few days apart. Where were you last night? Say between midnight and 2 a.m. Here, the man said without hesitation. I was right here. I had dinner in the grill room downstairs. Came up at 010 perhaps. I read for a while. I couldn't sleep. I just sat thinking, listening to the river. An alibi with no witness, as Vale expected. Mr. Croft, your wife's complaint, the one she made at the station. She was very specific. She mentioned things about you that were different. The man nodded, a look of profound sadness on his face. She said, I changed. Of course I've changed. How could one not? He gestured vaguely, as if at the war, at the world. She said, I held my teacup in the wrong hand. He held up his left hand, then switched to his right, flexing the fingers slowly. Shrapnel in the shoulder still aches the nerves. Sometimes my right hand just doesn't obey. I've adapted. I use my left. It was plausible. It was perfectly, agonizingly plausible. And the scar, Vale said, his voice barely a murmur. The man's eyes met his. There was no flicker. The scar, the one from your wedding photograph above your left eyebrow. The man gave a small, sad smile. He touched the smooth skin where the scar should have been. That my little vanity, a fencing foil at Oxford. Alina always hated it. He paused, then lowered his voice. When I was in France, after I was captured, there was a fire, a Stuka raid on a field hospital. I was lucky. Burns to my face, my hands. They had to do grafts. The surgeon, a German oddly enough, was quite brilliant. He tidied me up as he put it. He looked at his hands, then back at Vale. He took away the scar when I saw myself. I thought it was a small mercy, a fresh start. But when Alina saw me, I think it was just one more thing that proved I wasn't the man who left. He had an answer for everything. An answer wrapped in the unimpeachable, horrific trauma of the war. He had neutralized every discrepancy. He was a spider indeed. He had woven a web of logic so tight that any doubt seemed suddenly cruel. You'll need to come to the morgue, Mr. Croft, to make a formal identification, Vale said, his voice hardening slightly. Of course. Whenever you need me. The man stood, wrapping his grief and his silk robe around him. He was the perfect husband. Distraught, cooperative. Vale nodded slowly. Well, be in touch. He let himself out, the door closing with a soft, expensive snick. He stood in the plush corridor, the silence of the hotel pressing in on him. Every instinct in his body, honed by 20 years of listening to lies, was screaming. The man was too smooth. The answers were too clean, too complete. He hadn't just answered the questions, he had anticipated them. Vale walked back to the station, stewing the car. He needed the rain. He needed the cold, hard reality of the pavement beneath his feet. He sat at his desk for a long time as the light outside his window faded from gray to black. The rain continued its ceaseless, hushed drumming. He finally opened the heavy file from the War Office. He read through the commendations for bravery, the mission summaries heavily censored. He read about the capture, the months in the prison camp, the liberation. He found the medical file. Malnutrition, frostbite 3rd degree, lacerations, burns 2nd degree to face and hands. It was all there. Skin grafts performed at it all matched. He read on, his fingers stiff with cold, turning page after page of dry military prose. He was hours into the file, the only sound in the building, the ticking of the clock and the whisper of the rain. Then he found it stapled to the back of a psychological evaluation dated 6 months after liberation. A single thin sheet of paper. It was a memo from a psychiatrist to a commanding officer. Ray Captain Croft T. Subject's recovery is remarkable. His physical dexterity is returning. However, I note a pronounced, almost pathological aptitude for mimicry and impersonation, which was a key asset during his active operations. He seems to have difficulty in turning off this ability. He adopts personas unconsciously. His recall of details from his own past is at times inconsistent. While his recall of adopted legends is flawless, Vale stopped. He read the line again, a key asset during his active operations. He flipped back to the mission logs, searching for a specific code name. He glimpsed Operation Nightingale. It was almost entirely blacked out, but one line remained. Objective: infiltration of German high command facilities. Asset: the Magpie. Vale closed the file. The rain lashed against the window as if trying to get in. The man in the Savoy was not a soldier. Not just a soldier. He was a professional mimic, an actor, an asset, trained to become other people. Perhaps so well that he had, as the doctor noted, difficulty remembering who he was. Or perhaps he remembered all too well. Vale looked at the thin complaint form from Eleanor Croft. That man is not my husband. He was beginning to believe her. And the man who had answered every question so perfectly, the man who had explained away the scar and the left-handedness with such tragic, believable ease, was not a grieving widower. He was a performer, and his last performance had been for Alina. Chapter 3. The office was cold. The single desk lamp seemed to be losing its battle against the encroaching darkness. The shadows in the corners of the room growing deeper, thicker. Outside, the rain had not ceased. Its steady, hushed whisper providing the only sound beyond the ticking of the clock on the wall. It must have been past 10. The yard was quiet. The daytime bustle faded to the occasional distant telephone ring or the heavy footsteps of a constable on his rounds. Vale sat motionless. The War Office file opened before him. The words on the thin memo seemed to pulse in the weak light. Asset, the magpie. A magpie. A bird known for two things. It mimicked the calls of other birds, and it stole bright, glittering things. The man at the Seavoy was no grieving husband. He was not a soldier struggling with the ghosts of war. He was a void, a hollow man trained by the clandestine services of his own government to absorb the personalities of others, to wear their lives like a well-cut suit. The trauma wasn't that he couldn't remember his past. It was that he had been trained to discard it. Vale leaned back, the old leather of his chair groaning in protest. He closed his eyes, his mind meticulously dismantling the performance he had witnessed at the hotel. The man, he would not call him Croft, not even in his own head, had been perfect. The plausible grief, the silk dressing gown, the ready-made trauma-laced explanations for the scar and the left-handedness, they were brilliant. They were rehearsed, and they were almost certainly built from the real Thomas Croft's file. The magpie would have studied it. He would have learned about the shrapnel, the hospital fire, the fencing scar. He had incorporated the real man's history into his own legend, using the truth as a shield for his ultimate lie. He was an actor who had found the role of a lifetime. But why? Why this elaborate, dangerous charade? The answer, Vale thought, was always simple. It was rarely about espionage, not in a domestic setting. It was about what the real Thomas Croft possessed. A wealthy wife, a respectable name, an expensive flat in Kensington. Eleanor Croft had not died because she was delusional. She had died because she was the only person in the world who could not be fooled. She had lived with the original. She could spot the flaws in the copy, and she had paid for that intimate knowledge with her life. Vale felt a familiar cold weight settle in his chest. This was not a crime of passion. It was an execution carried out with the same chilling precision as a military operation. The fall down the stairs, it was clean, quiet, and easily mistaken for an accident, especially when the victim had already been painted as unstable. He now had a theory, solid as the mahogany desk beneath his hands, but he had no proof. He had a highly classified, heavily redacted military file suggesting a man was a good mimic. He had a dead woman. And he had an imposter with an unassailable alibi wrapped in the unimpeachable narrative of war trauma. To accuse him would be seen as an insult to a decorated war hero. He would be laughed out of his superior's office. No, he could not attack the man. Not directly. He had to attack the story. He needed two things. First, he needed to know what happened to the real Captain Croft. Vale suspected he was buried in an unmarked grave somewhere in France. A casualty not of the enemy, but of his own side. His identity stolen by an asset who saw an opportunity. Second, he needed proof that Eleanor Croft was sane. He needed something beyond Mulligan's report of a wild woman. He needed to find someone she confided in. A letter, a diary, something that showed her fear was rational, specific, and present before the fall. He picked up his telephone, the heavy Balik cold against his ear. He dialed Mulligan's extension. The sergeant answered on the first ring, his voice thick with sleep. Mulligan, apologies. Sir, no, it's fine. What's up? Two things, both delicate. Vale kept his voice low, as if the shadows in his office were listening. First, I want you to use your old contacts at the War Office, not the official channels. I want to know about Operation Nightingale. And I want to know about a field hospital near Strasbourg, the one Captain Croft was supposedly treated at after his capture. I want to know if any other British SOE operatives were there at the same time. Specifically, I want a name for the magpie. There was a heavy silence on the line. Mulligan knew what he was asking. He was asking him to poke a sleeping bear to dig into the clandestine world that had just won them the war. A world that did not like questions. That's delicate, sir. As you say, it is no paper, no names over the phone. Just ask. Understood, sir. And the second thing, find out who Mrs. Croft's family is, parents, siblings, and her solicitor. I need to know the state of Captain Croft's finances. I need to know who inherits. Right, sir. The motive. The motive. Vale confirmed. He hung up. He sat for another 10 minutes, the rain his only companion. Then he stood shrugging back into his trench coat. He could not sit here and wait. He had to move. He was going back to Wellington Court. When he had first searched the flat, he had been looking for signs of a struggle for forensic clues to a murder. Now he was looking for something else. He was looking for Elena. The cab ride was silent. The streets almost entirely deserted. The rain had finally mercifully stopped. The city was left in a state of dripping cold stillness. The air smelled of damp stone and the river. When the cab's engine idled and died at the curb, the silence was profound. He paid the driver and stood on the pavement, looking up at the Grand Cream building. It was a tomb, dark, save for a single light on the top floor, likely the superintendent's flat. He let himself in with the key the constable had given him. The black and white marble of the lobby was cold, his footsteps echoing unnaturally in the stillness. He faced the staircase. This time he did not examine the steps. He simply imagined her fear, her silk dressing gown, the moment of realization when she heard a sound behind her, the hand in her back. He walked up the 4 flights, the crimson runner muffling his tread. He reached the landing, the sealed door of 4B waiting for him. He broke his own seal for the second time and let himself in, clicking the door shut behind him. The flat was cold, the air stagnant. He did not turn on the lights. He used his torch, its beam, a single probing eye in the oppressive darkness. The immaculate, sterile sitting room looked even more lifeless in the narrow beam. The plumped cushions were like monuments in a museum, things not meant to be touched. He bypassed the study. The magpie would have sanitized that room, the room of the man he was pretending to be. Vale went to the bedroom. It was a large room dominated by a heavy wardrobe and a wide bed neatly made. On one side, a dressing table covered in perfume bottles and silverback brushes. Elena's side. He moved towards it, his torch beam sliding over the glass surfaces. He pulled a small padded stool out, and Saturday he began to open the drawers. Silk scarves, boxes of powder, costume jewelry. Nothing. He ran his fingers along the undersides, searching for anything taped or hidden. Nothing. He moved to her wardrobe. The faint floral scent of her perfume clung to the clothes, dresses, suits, blouses, all impeccably arranged. He checked the pockets. He felt the linings. He ran his hand across the shelf above displacing hat boxes. He paused. He opened one. Hats? Another My Hats. In the third, nestled beneath a dark velvet clock, was a small, leather-bound book. His heart gave a quiet, heavy thump, a diary. He sat on the edge of the bed, the springs sighing softly under his weight. He opened it. His torch found the first page. It was a date from 3 weeks ago before her husband's return. The script was neat, flowing, lunch with Margaret, awful weather. Worried about the post. He flipped forward. He found the entry for the day. Captain Croft returned. He is home. Thomas is home. He walked out of the cab and I did not know him. He looks thinner, yes, but that is not it. His eyes, he looked at me as if I were a stranger. He was trying to charm. He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. I am sick with relief and sick with something else. Something cold. I must be wrong. It is the war. It is just the war. Vale turned the page. The entries became more frantic. He does not remember Mittens, our cat. Our beloved Mittens who died 2 years ago. When I mentioned him, he just nodded as if I was speaking of a neighbor. He said, "Ah, yes, the cat." Thomas wept for that cat. This man is a stranger. And then an entry from 4 days ago, the day before she went to Mulligan. I found him in the study. He had the floorboards up. He was looking for my grandmother's silver. The set we buried when the Blitz began. I asked him what he was doing. He smiled that smooth, cold smile and said he was checking for dry rot. Thomas knew where we buried it, but this man, he was hunting for it. He wants the money. He doesn't know me. He is not my husband. I am going to the police tomorrow. I cannot sleep in this house with him. I am terrified. Vale closed the book. His hand was shaking just slightly. This was it. This was the proof. This was the sane, terrified woman. This was the motive. He slipped the diary into the deep pocket of his trench coat. He stood, his torch beam sweeping the room one last time. He had what he needed. He could bring him in. He could break that perfect, plausible alibi. He moved into the hallway towards the front door. He was thinking of the C-voy of the man's smooth, confident face. He reached for the doorwork knob and froze. He heard a sound, not from the hallway outside, from inside the flat. It was a soft, metallic snake. It came from the study at the other end of the dark, silent flat. Vale extinguished his torch. The blackness was total, immediate, and suffocating. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. Someone else was in the flat. They had been there in the study this entire time, hidden in the shadows, watching him. Chapter 4. Time stopped. The darkness in the flat was no longer a simple absence of light. It was a physical presence, heavy and absolute. It pressed against Vale's eyes, his skin. He stood with his hand on the doorknob, a statue of a man, every nerve ending alive and screaming. The silence that followed the metallic snick was profound. It was a vacuum waiting to be filled. Vale strained his hearing, listening past the faint residual hum of the sleeping city, past the drip of a tap in the kitchen, listening for the one sound that did not belong: breath. He could hear it slow, methodical, and calm. It was not the breathing of a common thief, startled and panicked. It was the breathing of a man who was waiting. It came from the study, a dark rectangle of deeper blackness off the main hallway. Vale's mind raced, not with panic, but with cold, sharp calculation. His torch was a heavy weight in his left hand. His right hand rested on the diary in his coat pocket. He was not armed. He rarely carried a weapon. His battles were fought with paper, with questions, with the steady application of pressure. Now he wished for the simple, brutish comfort of a .38 Webbel. The man in the study had been there when he arrived. He had let Vale search the bedroom, let him find the diary. He had been listening, judging. The snake was not an accident, it was a signal, an announcement. "You found what you were looking for. I take it," a voice said. The words emerged from the darkness of the study. Not a whisper, but a quiet conversational tone. It was a cultured voice, smooth with an edge of something Vale couldn't place. Not menace, not quite. It was boardroom. It was Whitehall. It was not the voice of the imposter from the C-voy. This was someone new. "The diary," the voice continued, as if discussing the weather. "Mrs. Croft's little book of terrors. Yes, we thought it might be here." Vale did not reply. He slowly, deliberately took his hand off the doorknob. He turned, facing the black void of the study. He still could not see a thing. "Turn on your torch, Inspector," the voice invited. "Let's be civil. We are, after all, on the same side." Ostensibly, Vale's thumb found the switch. He hesitated. A light would make him a target, but the man's tone suggested this was not a prelude to violence. It was a negotiation. He clicked the torch on. The beam, narrow and bright, cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing. The study appeared empty. The desk was as he'd left it. The curtains were still. "A little to your left," the voice said, amused. Vale shifted the beam. A man was sitting quite comfortably in the heavy leather armchair in the corner, a space Vale's previous search had missed. He was in shadow, the beam catching only his knees and one hand, which rested on the arm of the chair. He was dressed in a dark, impeccably tailored suit, the kind that didn't wrinkle, the kind Vale only ever saw on permanent secretaries. Vale raised the beam to his face. The man didn't flinch. He was perhaps 50, with thin, pale hair and the kind of gray, tired eyes that had seen far too much paper and far too many closed-door meetings. He held a silver cigarette lighter in his hand, the source of the snick. He hadn't been lighting a cigarette. He had just been holding it, his thumb on the flint. A bit theatrical. "I apologize," the man said, his voice as gray as his eyes. "But one can't be too careful. You are Detective Inspector Vale. You are methodical. You are quiet. And you are, as of this evening, a profound complication. Who are you?" Vale's voice was low. His torch beam held steady on the man's face. "My name is unimportant. Let's say I'm a colleague of the Magpie. A former colleague, to be precise. From the department he used to work for, the department that doesn't exist." The man's eyes flickered to the bulge in Vale's pocket. "You have the War Office file." Mulligan was clumsy in his inquiries. So, they weren't just watching the imposter. They were watching the police. Eleanor Croft was murdered. Vale stated, the words felt hard, solid in the cold, still air. "Mrs. Croft is dead," the man corrected, his tone precise. "It is a tragedy born of her poor timing and his indiscretion. He was not supposed to be here. He was not supposed to be anywhere." The man, the gray man from Whitehall, leaned forward, his face emerging more fully into the light. He looked exhausted. "The Magpie, as you call him, is a rogue asset. He was, let us say, decommissioned, but he is a difficult man to file away. He was our best. He could become anyone so completely that he sometimes forgot to come back. When the war ended, we had concerns. He knew too much. He had too many faces. We made arrangements for his retirement. A quiet farm, a new name, permanent supervision. He escaped," Vale said. "He evaporated." The man counted. "Took with him the identity of a man he knew was truly dead. Captain Thomas Croft, a man he'd met in that field hospital in France. A man who conveniently had a wealthy waiting wife in London. The Magpie saw an opportunity for a comfortable new life funded by Mrs. Croft's inheritance. He is at his core a thief. He just steals lives instead of jewels." The pieces slotted into place. The imposter wasn't a random opportunist. He was a trained sociopath, a ghost in the system, and he was running from his own masters. "And you," Vale asked, "you've been what? Following him?" "We have been hunting him," Inspector quietly, "for weeks. We knew he had come to London. We knew he had assumed the Croft identity. We were observing, preparing to retrieve him. We could not simply walk into the Savoy and arrest him. It would create a fuss. Questions would be asked. Then Mrs. Croft went to your station. And you did nothing," Vale said, the coldness in his own voice surprising him. "We were assessing the new strategic reality," the man said without a trace of emotion. "Her visit to your station accelerated his timeline. He knew she was a threat to his new life. He silenced her. He murdered her. As you say, the manied as if discussing a logistical problem. Which brings us to you, Inspector. You with your official file and your little book of proof. You are now the single greatest threat to a clean resolution. A clean resolution. We are going to retrieve our asset tonight. The matter of Captain Croft and his grief will be concluded. He will vanish. The case will go cold. It is the neatest way." Vale felt the diary against his chest. He thought of Elena, her fear so palpable on the page. "I am terrified." He thought of her body at the bottom of the polished stairs. "No," Vale said. It was a single quiet word. The man's eyebrow raised. "No. Eleanor Croft was a British citizen murdered in her own home. She will have justice. Not a clean resolution, not a quiet vanishing. He will be arrested. He will be tried, and he will be hanged. I have her diary. I have the motive. I have the inconsistencies in his file. I am arresting him tonight." The man from Whitehall looked at Vale with a faint, deep sadness. It was the look a professor might give a promising student who had just delivered a spectacularly naive and incorrect answer. "You don't, you know," the man said softly. "You have nothing. You have a classified file you obtained improperly, which will be buried under the official secrets. Act so fast your head will spin. You have a diary which we will take from you, and you have a suspect who by the time you get your constables organized will be gone." He stood up slowly from the chair. He was taller than Vale had thought. "You are a good detective, Vale. You operate in a world of rules, of right and wrong, of evidence and juries. I operate in the world that is. The war didn't end, Inspector. It just went into the shadows, and that is where you are now. You are in the shadows with us." He took a step forward. Vale did not move. The torch beam fixed on the man's chest. "Give me the diary, Inspector. Go home. Go to sleep. In the morning, you will read in the Times that the grieving Captain Croft, distraught over his wife's tragic, accidental death, has taken his own life by jumping into the Thames. The file will be closed. It will be tidy. It will be correct. And if I refuse?" The man smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Then you won't, because you are a smart man and you understand that I am not here alone. You understand that my colleagues are downstairs in the lobby and across the street. You understand that you will not leave this building with that book." The standoff was absolute. The cold air of the flat, the smell of dust and old perfume, the steady beam of the torch. The two men, one a creature of law, the other a creature of the state. Vale's mind was a chessboard, pieces moving at lightning speed. The man was right. He could not win this. Not here, not now. He could not fight a man, a car, a squad. But he could not, would not hand over the only piece of justice Eleanor Croft had left. He made a decision. He did the last thing the man from Whitehall would expect. He clicked off his torch. The darkness was immediate, a thunderclap of black. In the same fluid motion, Vale turned, yanked open the heavy flat door, and ran. He didn't run towards the stairs. That was what they would expect. He ran the other way down the short carpeted hall, towards the other staircase, the narrow, unlit service stairs at the back of the building. He heard a shout from the study, "Stop him!" It was no longer a conversational tone. It was a command. He hit the service door with his shoulder. It burst open onto a small freezing landing and a steep winding set of wooden steps. He plunged down them, taking them 2, 3 at a time, his hands skimming the cold, dusty wall for balance. He was moving in total darkness, guided only by memory and desperation, the sound of his own thundering heart, and the heavy, frantic footsteps of at least 2 men following him from the flat above. Chapter 5. The darkness was not a void, but a texture. It was thick with the cold of old stone and the sharp, gritty smell of dust. Vale plunged down the service stairs, his right hand sliding against the rough, splintery wooden rail, his left pressed against the bulge of the diary in his coat pocket. It felt less like a book and more like a lodestone, a dense, heavy object pulling him down into the earth. He did not panic. Panic was a luxury, a fire that consumed vital thought. Instead, his mind, sharpened by the cold and the dark, achieved a state of hyperfocus. He was aware of every sensation, the sharp click-clack of his own leather heels on the wooden treads, a sound that seemed entirely too loud, a betrayal in the quiet. He was aware of the footsteps behind him, 2 sets heavier than his, descending with a practiced, unhurried rhythm. They were not running. They were professionals. They knew, as he did, that a narrow, winding staircase in total darkness was a trap for those who rushed. His flight was not a frantic scramble. It was a controlled descent. He moved as a man walking through a fog-bound field, trusting his feet, his balance, his sense of the space around him. The air grew colder, damper. The smell of dust was joined by a deeper mineral scent, the scent of cellars, of foundations. He reached the bottom. His foot, expecting another step, met the hard flagstone of a floor. He stumbled, catching himself against a cold, damp brick wall. He was in the building's underbelly. He paused for a single, crucial second. He listened. The footsteps above him were still descending. 30 seconds, perhaps less. He needed to see. He clicked his torch on, sweeping the beam in a low, fast arc. It was a crypt, a maze of low-groined arches and thick brick pillars that supported the weight of the expensive lives above. Pipes thick as a man's arm and weeping condensation ran along the ceiling. In one corner, a colossal dormant boiler sat like a sleeping iron beast. Shadows deep and absolute pulled behind every pillar, every stack of forgotten furniture draped in white sheets, every rack of wine bottles resting in dusty aloves. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. The wooden door at the top of the steps thudded shut, plunging the cellar back into a darkness so complete it was disorienting. Vale clicked off his torch. He was blind, but so were they. He held his breath. The silence was absolute. The only sound was the slow, steady drip, drip, drip of water from a leaky pipe somewhere to his left. He used it as a guide, moving silently away from the sound of the stairs, his feet sliding over the stone to make no sound. He was a shadow moving through a gallery of deeper shadows. His mind was working, assembling the pieces, the gray man, the colleagues. They hadn't come for the diary. Not really. They had come for him. The diary was just the justification, the lever. They couldn't allow a Scotland Yard detective to unwind a secret so carefully stitched. Eleanor Croft's murder was an indiscretion. His investigation was a complication. He had spent his life believing in the structure, in the yard, in the law, in the clear, delineated line between right and wrong. Now he was in a gray subterranean world, both literally and figuratively, and the line was gone. The gray man was not the enemy. He was simply the opposition, a man from a parallel service, one that cleaned up the messes the war had left behind. A sudden bright click echoed through the vault. A weak yellow bulb, encased in a wire cage, flickered to life near the boiler. It did not banish the darkness. It merely curated it, creating long, menacing shadows that stretched and warped, turning the cellar into a landscape of stark relief and impenetrable black. They had found the light switch. Vale froze. He was crouched behind a tall stack of wooden crates, their surfaces stenkled with faded ink. He could smell old wine and cork. He saw them, two men. They were moving apart as he knew they would. They were dressed in identical dark suits, their faces pale and indistinct in the weak light. They were not looking as a policeman would for evidence. They were hunting. They scanned the pools of darkness, their movements economical, balanced, their hands in their pockets. Vale knew with a certainty that chilled him that their hands were not empty. They wouldn't shoot, not here. The sound would bring the whole building down upon them, but they would not hesitate to use other, quieter forms of persuasion. He was no longer a detective. He was prey. He began to move, a slow, painful crawl from the crates to the deeper shadow of the boiler. The boiler's faint residual warmth was a strange comfort. It was a piece of the living, breathing building. He pressed himself against its iron flank, the metal cool, not cold. The men communicated in an almost telepathic silence. One gestured with his head. They were flanking the room, one moving left, one right. A slow, closing pincer. Vale looked around, his eyes adapting to the gloom. He was trapped. The stairs were guarded. The main space was a killing floor. He needed another way out. He scanned the wall behind the boiler, and he saw it. A door, not a proper door, but a low metal-clad rectangle secured with a heavy iron bar set in two brackets. A coal chute or a delivery hatch to the mews alley he knew must be behind the building. It was his only chance. He had to move. He waited until the man on the right passed behind a particularly thick brick pillar, his footsteps momentarily muffled. Vale pushed off from the boiler and crossed the 10 feet of open, dimly lit stone. He reached the door. His hands found the iron bar. It was cold, heavy. He gripped it. He knew the sound of its lifting would be the signal. He took a deep breath, held it, and lifted. The metal made a low, protesting shray as it scraped upwards out of the brackets. There. The voice was a sharp, contained bark. Vale didn't wait to see them. He dropped the bar. It hit the stone floor with a heavy ringing clang and wrenched the small, low door open. A wave of cold, clean night air hit him in the face. It smelled of rain, wet pavement, and freedom. He threw himself through the opening, rolling onto his hands and knees on slick, uneven cobblestones. He was out. He was in the mews alley. He heard the heavy thud of a man's body hitting the small doorframe, too large to follow him with any speed. Vale did not look back. He got to his feet and began to walk fast, his heart a cold, heavy hammer in his chest. He did not run. Running drew the eye. Running meant panic. He walked, his shoulders hunched, his hat pulled low. Just another gray man disappearing into the gray London night. He emerged from the alley onto a quiet tree-lined street. The rain had paused. The clouds were a torn gray ceiling, revealing a sliver of cold. In different moonlight, he stood for a moment, the silence of the night profound after the contained tension of the cellar. He checked his pocket. The diary was there, safe. He was free, but he was also adrift. He could not go to Scotland Yard. The gray man's influence was there, his colleagues watching, waiting. Mulligan's clumsy inquiry had proven that he could not go to his own flat. They would be there or would be soon. He was a man with a case with proof, but with no office to write his report in and no superior to hand it to. He had been excised from the system. He was, in the gray man's words, a complication that now had to be resolved. He stood on the wet pavement, the city's dampness seeping into his shoes. He had two adversaries now, the magpie, a killer hiding in a luxury hotel, and the gray man, a shadow who wanted to erase the entire affair. Both wanted him gone. A cold, logical clarity settled over him. If the law was a fiction, he would have to write his own ending. He could not use the power of the Yard, but he had the diary. And he had the one thing neither of his adversaries knew he possessed, a complete understanding of the entire board. The gray man wanted to retrieve his rogue asset quietly. The magpie wanted to inherit his new life free of his old masters. They were enemies and Vale was caught between them. He could not arrest the magpie, he could not fight the gray man, but he thought a cold, thin smile touching his lips for a bare instant. Perhaps he could make them fight each other. He knew where the magpie was. He knew what the gray man wanted. He would not go to the police. He would not go home. He would go to the Savoy. Chapter 6. The night hung over London like a heavy damp shroud, quiet, wet, and cold. Vale hailed a cab, his voice thick when he gave the driver the name of the hotel. His mind was a watchmaker's table scattered with small, intricate pieces. The adrenaline of the cellar chase had receded, replaced by a sharp metallic clarity. He was not a detective anymore. Not for this night. The protective shield of Scotland Yard was gone. The gray man's words echoed in his mind. The war didn't end, Inspector. It just went into the shadows. And now Vale was in those shadows with them. Armed not with cuffs or a warrant, but with a dead woman's diary and a dangerous idea. The cab pulled up to the Savoy's bright portico. It was another world, an island of warm golden light, insulated from the damp gray outside. Vale paid the driver and stepped out. The doorman, despite the dampness of his trench coat and the exhaustion under his hat, gave him a nod. Vale did not belong to the law, perhaps, but he belonged to authority. It was a weight a man carried in his shoulders, and Dorman sensed such things. The lobby was humming with quiet late-night activity. A piano, muffled and distant, bled softly into the velvet-lined walls. Vale walked across the opulent carpet, feeling like a specter. He did not go to the desk. He walked to the brass gaga lifts. The gray man's people were watching the building. He was sure of it in the lobby outside in cars, but they were not expecting him to come here. They were expecting him to run, to hide, to regroup, to try official channels. They saw him as a cog in the system, not a ghost like themselves. That was his advantage. The lift doors whispered shut. He pressed the button for the third floor, rooms 312. The soft ascent was a strange, hollow feeling in his gut. He was setting a trap, but he was also the bait. The corridor was hushed, plushly silent. His footsteps were swallowed by the thick carpet. He reached the door of 312. He stood. He listened. Nothing. He knocked 3 sharp, solid raps. He had knocked before as a detective. Now he knocked as an intruder. A silence, then a muffled voice from within. "Who is it?" "Room service," Vale said. His voice pitched low, disinterested. A pause. "I didn't order anything. Called down from this room, sir. A bottle of brandy." Vale waited, his hand not on the knob. A movement inside. He heard the careful slide of a lock, the metallic jangle of a chain. The door opened a crack, a sliver of darkness and one suspicious eye. Vale put his shoulder to the door. The sudden, brutal force of it caught the man inside completely off guard. The door flew open, the chain ripping from the wooden frame with a splintering crack. Vale used his momentum to burst into the room, slamming the door shut behind him, turning the deadbolt. The imposter, Thomas Croft, stumbled back, a look of pure, unadulterated shock on his face. This was not the calm, grieving man Vale had seen earlier. This was a stranger, cold, alert, and intelligent. The silk dressing gown was gone, replaced by pressed trousers and a white shirt, the sleeves rolled up. He had been packing. A half-full suitcase lay open on the bed. "Vale," the man hissed. His eyes darted to the door, then back to Vale. "What the hell are you doing?" "Sit down, magpie," Vale said. His voice was as flat and low as the light in the room. The name hit the man's face like a physical blow. The color drained from his perfect, handsome features. It wasn't fear. It was the cold shock of recognition. He was no longer Thomas Croft. He was an asset. "What did you say?" "You heard me." Vale stood by the door, his hand in his pocket, clutching the diary. He did not move further into the room. He let the silence and the name do the work. The show is over. The performance was excellent. The weeping widower hour, the war trauma, the skin graft to explain the scar, the shrapnel to explain the hand. It was all very neat, all pulled straight from the real Thomas Croft's file. The magpie stared, his mind racing, reassessing. He was no longer dealing with a plotting copper. He was dealing with someone who knew. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, but the conviction was gone. His voice was a dry rasp. "I know Operation Nightingale," Vale said, his voice a quiet, relentless tap. "I know you were decommissioned. I know you evaporated. And I know you found a dead man's life and decided to steal it." The magpie slowly, deliberately sat on the edge of the bed. He looked at his suitcase, then at Vale. The predator, cornered, was calculating. So the magpie said, his voice recovering its smooth, cultured tone, though a new metallic edge was present, "You're here to arrest me." He almost smiled. "You alone? You think you can take me, old man? After what I've done, who I am?" "No," Vale said. That one word confused him again. "I'm not here to arrest you," Vale said, moving slowly toward the window, keeping the man and the door in his sight. "I'm here because they are." This time, the fear was real. It was a visible, physical reaction, a tightening of the jaw, a widening of the eyes. The fear was not a Vale or the police or a prison cell. It was the fear of his true masters. "Who?" he whispered. "The men you ran from, the men who clean up the messes, the men who don't exist. They're here. They were waiting for me at the flat. They're downstairs in the lobby. They're across the street. They've been hunting you, magpie. And now they found you." The magpie's face was a mask of pale concentration. He was listening not to Vale, but to the sounds of the hotel, the distant hum of the lift, the silence in the corridor. They know I'm here. They know I'm here," Vale clarified. "They followed me from the flat. They tried to take me in the cellar. I have something they want." Vale tapped his trench coat pocket. "Elena's diary. The proof of your motive. The one thing that unravels your perfect alibi. They want it so they can burn it and bury this entire messy affair." The magpie's mind was working, seeing the angles. "And you? You ran from them and came here to me. You're killer." He laughed, a short, sharp, incredulous sound. "Why?" "Because they want two things," Vale said, his voice barely a murmur. "They want the diary, and they want you. They want to retrieve their asset permanently. Their plan is to take me, take the book, then come up here and make you disappear. A tragic suicide, perhaps, just like your wife's tragic accident." Vale stood in the center of the room, a man of utter exhaustion, a man with no cards left to play. "I can't fight them. I can't arrest you. The law is gone for tonight. There's just this room and the shadows." He looked at the imposter. "You're a thief of lives. You're a mimic. You're a killer. But you're also a survivor. They're waiting for me to walk out that door. The moment I do, they'll take me in the diary. And then they will come for you." The magpie stood up. He was vibrating with a cold, contained energy. He was a creature of paranoia and survival, and Vale had just confirmed his deepest fears. "What do you want?" the magpie hissed. "I want justice for Eleanor Croft, but I'll settle for chaos." Vale reached into his pocket. He did not pull out the diary. He pulled out his room key, the key to 4B Wellington Court, and tossed it onto the bed. "The diary isn't on me," Vale lied. "It's back at the flat, hidden where they couldn't find it." The magpies stared at the key. "They're waiting for me," Vale said, walking toward the door. "They're waiting for the detective. They're focused on me, the complication. They aren't expecting you. Not yet." He put his hand on the deadbolt. "You're a ghost. You're the man who evaporated. So evaporate." The magpie looked from the key to Vale. He didn't understand. "What?" "I'm going to walk out this door. They will follow me. They will try to get the key thinking it leads to the diary. They'll tear that flat apart. It will buy you time. Time to disappear again. Time to run. You do that." The magpie was deeply suspicious. "You'd let me go." Vale turned his hand on the lock, his face a mask of utter weariness. "I'm not letting you go. I'm pointing you at them. They took my world, my rules, and broke them. They want to clean this up quietly. I want it to be loud. I want it to be messy. I want one of their own. Their best out in the wind with nothing to lose, reminding them that the shadows bite back." He paused. "Go to the flat. Get the diary. It's your only leverage against them. Or burn it. I don't care. Just be the complication they can't solve." Vale unlocked the door. He didn't look back. "Good luck, Magpie." He opened the door and stepped out into the plush, silent corridor, leaving the imposter alone in the room. A man presented with an impossible choice. Run and be hunted forever, or go after the one piece of evidence that could either save him or destroy him. A trap laid by a detective who had just walked unarmed into a lobby full of hunters. Chapter 7. Final. Vale pulled the door of room 312 shut, the snick of the lock echoing in his own ears, louder than a gunshot. The silence of the plush corridor was absolute a vacuum. He did not run. He did not even walk quickly. He moved with the deliberate heavy tread of a defeated man. His shoulders slumped, his hat pulled low. He felt in that moment the exhaustion of the last 3 days settle on him like a physical weight, a coat heavier than his own damp wool. He was aware of every detail, the faint scent of wax and old tobacco in the air, the discreet golden light from the wall sconces, the way the thick carpet pile muffled his own footsteps, as if the hotel itself were conspiring to erase his presence. He was a ghost haunting the edges of a world he no longer understood. He pressed the call button for the lift. He heard its distant mechanical hum, a soft hydraulic sigh as it ascended. He was the bait. He had thrown the magpie to the wolves. But to do so, he had to first walk into the wolves' den. The brass door slid open. He stepped inside the small gilded cage and turned. His reflection in the polished brass was a stranger. A pale, drawn face, eyes like 2 dark holes in the shadow of his hat. The door slid shut, sealing him in. The descent was smooth, slow, a gentle drop into the heart of the confrontation. He knew what was waiting for him. The gray man's team. They would not be obvious, but they would be there. They would be the men reading newspapers that were 2 hours old. The men waiting for a car that would never arrive. The men staring intently into the middle distance. The lift doors opened. The lobby. It was exactly as he had pictured. The distant piano had stopped. The night's true silence, the 3000 AM stillness, had claimed the space. By the grand arched entrance, a man in a dark suit stood examining a painting on the wall, his posture too rigid for art appreciation. Near the reception desk, another man was speaking into a telephone, his hand covering the receiver, though the switchboard was visibly dark. 2 more sat in plush armchairs, their backs to a potted palm, a perfect symmetrical set of predators. They did not look up as Vale crossed the marble floor. Their stillness, their coordinated lack of interest, was more threatening than any weapon. They were waiting for him to clear the door, to step outside, away from the civilian witnesses, away from the light. They would not make a scene in the Seaboy. They were professionals, men who tidied the world's messy edges. Vale pushed through the heavy glass revolving door. The night air hit him like a physical blow. It was cold, sharp, and the rain had begun again. A fine, miserable drizzle that turned the streetlights into blurred, weeping halos. The pavement was black and slick. He stood under the awning, a man alone, looking for a cab he had no intention of hailing. Across the street, the black Humber sedan was still there, a dark, patient shape at the curb. He felt them before he saw them. Two of the men had exited the lobby behind him, emerging from the revolving door with the same unnatural, coordinated silence. One moved to his left, one to his right. They were not close enough to touch, but they had cut off his world. "Inspector Vale," said the man on his left. His voice was flat, the same voice as the seller. "You've been a difficult man to find. We're going to have a talk." "I have nothing to say to you," Vale said, his gaze fixed on the Humber. "That's not a problem," said the man on his right. "You'll just listen, but we'll do it elsewhere. Please come with us." A hand gestured towards the dark sedan. It was an invitation backed by the absolute certainty of force. This was the moment the trap was sprung. He was the bait and the wolves had him. And then the hotel's revolving door moved again. The magpie Thomas Croft stepped out onto the pavement. He was not running. He was not in a panic. He was dressed in his overcoat, his bag in one hand. He looked calm, composed, and utterly lethal. His eyes, passing over the two men flanking Vale, settled on Vale himself. In that single cold glance, Vale understood. The magpie hadn't believed him. He was a professional mimic, a man who lived by reading the flaws in a performance, and he had read Vale's. He knew the diary wasn't at the flat. He knew it was a bluff. He knew with the cold certainty of a fellow shadow dweller that his old masters were here in this lobby and that Vale had just walked him into a trap. But he had made one fatal miscalculation. He had assumed Vale was working with them, that this was all an elaborate retrieval operation. The magpie looked at the two agents, then at Vale, and he smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a cornered animal that had just realized the trap had a flaw. "He has it," the magpie said, his voice clear and carrying in the quiet night. He pointed not at his own bag, but at Vale's trench coat, the asset. "He's carrying it." The two agents froze. This was not in their plan. Their target was here, but he was pointing at their other target. "What?" The agent on the left snapped. "The book, the proof. He's got it on him," the magpie said, taking a casual step towards the curb, away from the cluster of men. "He was going to trade it. He's dirty." The confusion lasted only a second, but a second was all he needed. The two men across the street, seeing their target on the move, burst from the Humber, shouting, "Hold him! He's here!" The lobby doors burst open as the other two agents, realizing the operation was collapsing, ran out. The pavement was suddenly a chaos of dark suits. "Get the asset! Get him!" one agent yelled, pointing at the magpie. The magpie did not run. He simply dropped his bag, and in the same fluid motion, he attacked the two men closest to him, the two who had been flanking Vale. It was not a fight. It was a dissection. He moved with a speed that was terrifying. A blur of precise, economical violence. His hand, a rigid blade, struck the first agent's throat. The man made a sound like a punctured bellows and crumpled. The second agent reached for his coat, but the magpie was already inside his guard. A brutal elbow to the solar plexus, doubling him over, gasping on the wet pavement. No shots, no screams, just the thud of bodies and the hiss of stolen breath. The remaining four agents stared, momentarily stunned by the sheer brutal efficiency. Vale, no longer the center of attention, simply stepped back. He melted into the deep shadows of the hotel's portico, a spectator at his own execution. The magpie vaulted over the trunk of a parked cab, using it as a barrier. The two agents from the Humbers scrambled after him. The other two, having seen their colleagues dispatched, moved more carefully, fanning out, trying to corner him. He's heading for the alley. The magpie was a ghost. He flowed over the wet pavement, his movements silent. He was not just a mimic, he was a trained operator, and he was in his element. He disappeared into the black slit between two buildings. The four agents plunged in after him, a frantic chase of shadows, swallowed by shadows. Then, silence. The only sounds were the persistent tapping of the rain and the pain-wet gasping of the man on the pavement, the one who had taken the blow to the throat. Vale stepped out of the shadows. The doorman, who had wisely vanished at the first sign of trouble, peeked out from the hotel. Vale walked over to the man on the ground. The man looked up at him, his face pale with pain and fury. "You," and the man choked. This was you." Vale reached into the inside pocket of his trench coat. He pulled out the small leather-bound book, Eleanor Croft's diary. It was real. He had lied to the magpie, but he had told the gray man the truth. He looked at the agent, then tossed the book onto his chest. "You have your asset," Vale said, his voice devoid of triumph. "And you have your proof. Your file is complete. You can burn it all." The agent stared at the book, then at Vale, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. Vale hadn't been a complication. He had been the catalyst. He had used the law, the diary, and the Savoy Hotel as a stage, and he had just forced the two sides of the shadow world to collide. You let him go," the agent whispered, clutching the diary. "He was your monster," Vale said. "Not mine." He turned his back on the man. He found his hat, which had fallen nearby, and brushed the rainwater from its brim. He settled it on his head. He walked away from the Savoy. He didn't look back at the chaos. He didn't look for the disappearing agents. He just walked. The rain was cold, washing the grime of the city, washing the night away. He had failed. He had not arrested the killer. He had not seen justice served in a courtroom. He had bent every rule he had ever lived by, and he had broken more than one. The magpie was gone, free, a ghost in the wind, but he would be hunted by his own masters for the rest of his life. A different kind of prison. The gray man had his diary. The murder of Eleanor Croft would be buried, filed away under the Official Secrets Act, a tragedy erased from history, just as they had wanted. Everyone had lost, and yet, as Detective Inspector Vale walked, his footsteps a solitary rhythmic beat on the wet pavement, he felt a strange cold peace. He was the only man left who knew the entire true story. The law had failed, the state had failed, but he had not. He had seen it through into the shadows and back out again. The file was closed. He was a detective, and it was time to go home.